The first time I understood that my family could erase me without raising their voices was the day my own wedding invitation arrived without my name on it. Not metaphorically. Literally. I was 31 years old, standing in my kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, holding a thick, cream envelope embossed with gold lettering. It was addressed to the Carter family. No first names, no individual acknowledgement, just the collective, as if I were an accessory that came with a household, not a person who had lived her own life for over 3 decades. Inside was the formal invitation to my younger sister's wedding. My sister, Elaine Carter, 28. The golden child, the one everyone described as driven and visionary, even though she'd never held a job longer than 9 months without my father quietly arranging the next one. She was marrying Daniel Rowe, an associate at a mid-sized corporate law firm in Chicago, the kind of man my parents loved immediately because he wore tailored suits and spoke in confident paragraphs. The invitation listed my parents, Richard and Beverly Carter, as hosts. It listed Elaine and Daniel. It listed the venue, a restored mansion outside of Cleveland with manicured hedges and a price tag I didn't want to think about. It did not list me, not as maid of honor, not as sister of the bride, not even as and family. I stood there longer than I should have, reading the card as if my name might appear if I stared hard enough. It didn't. That omission might sound small, petty even, but in families like mine, nothing is accidental. Every silence is intentional. Every exclusion is a message. And that message was clear. I was already being phased out. My name is Claire Monroe Carter. I was born first. I'm the older sister, the one who learned early how to read a room, how to soften my voice, how to make myself useful so there'd be space for me. I worked my way through college at Ohio State with loans and part-time jobs because my parents' education fund had quietly run dry by the time it was my turn. Elaine, meanwhile, went to a private university in Boston, fully paid. The difference was never explained out loud. It didn't have to be. My father liked to say, "We invest where there's return." I became a compliance analyst for a regional healthcare company. Not glamorous, not dinner party impressive, but stable, ethical. The kind of job that kept hospitals from getting sued. The kind of job no one bragged about. Elaine called it paper pushing. I didn't cry when I saw the invitation. I didn't call my parents demanding an explanation. I did what I'd always done. I observed. I RSVP'd, yes, and I made a note. The weeks leading up to the wedding unfolded exactly as I expected, once I knew what to watch for. Elaine never asked me to help with planning, never asked my opinion on flowers or dresses. When I texted to ask what color the bridesmaids were wearing, she replied 3 hours later with, "Oh, I already finalized that. It's ivory." Ivory. The color you don't put anyone else in unless you want confusion. At Sunday dinners, my parents talked about the wedding like it was a corporate launch. Guest lists, seating charts, which judge would be attending, which donor from my father's construction business might invest more heavily after seeing the family together. Together. That word kept showing up. I noticed something else, too. Every conversation about the future included Elaine and Daniel. Their careers, their potential children, their role in continuing the Carter legacy. I was never mentioned. When I was, it was as an afterthought. "Claire's still doing her compliance thing," my mother said once, waving her hand as if dismissing a fly. "She likes it simple." Simple. Another word that sounds neutral until you hear it enough times to realize it means small. 2 weeks before the wedding, my father called me into his home office. The room with dark wood shelves and framed photos of projects he'd completed over 30 years. Highways, office parks, apartment complexes, all bearing his name. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly. I sat. "We need to talk about the seating arrangement," he said. I waited. "We've decided it would be better if you weren't at the head table." There it was, the line drawn clean and cold. "I assumed I wouldn't be," I said. He looked relieved. "Good, you understand." He leaned back in his chair. "Daniel's family is very particular. Appearances matter. Elaine needs the spotlight." "And I would interfere?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. He never did. "You've chosen a quieter path, Claire. There's nothing wrong with that. But this wedding isn't about quiet. I nodded. What about the family photos? I asked. A pause. Brief. Calculated. We'll see how the day goes. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't about a wedding. It was about positioning. I left their house that evening and sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not sadness, not anger, clarity. If I was already being edited out of the picture, I needed to stop assuming I had a place in the frame. The wedding day arrived, bright and cold. October sunlight glinting off marble steps, guests in tailored coats and polished shoes. I wore a navy dress I'd paid for myself, conservative, invisible. At the ceremony, I sat in the second row, far right. Elaine didn't look at me once. At the reception, the seating chart placed me with distant cousins and a retired accountant who asked if I was between jobs. I smiled and said no. Then came the speeches. My father stood, glass raised. He spoke about legacy, about pride, about how Elaine had always known what she wanted and gone after it. My mother dabbed her eyes. Daniel's parents spoke about joining families. No one mentioned me, not once. The photographer called for immediate family photos. Parents of the bride, he said. Bride and groom. Siblings. Elaine leaned in and whispered, "Maybe you can step out for this one. We want a clean look." Clean. I stepped back. The camera flashed, and just like that, the image was complete without me. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my email and found a message from my father's assistant. Subject line: estate planning documents. Update. I hadn't known there was an update. I clicked. And that was the moment everything shifted from exclusion to betrayal, because attached was a draft of my parents' revised will, and my name was no longer on it. I read the attachment 3 times before my brain accepted what my eyes were seeing. Revised last will and testament of Richard and Beverly Carter. The language was clean, clinical, precise in the way only lawyers and accountants know how to be. Pages of clauses outlining assets, trusts, beneficiaries, contingencies. Elaine Carter Rowe, primary heir. Future children of Elaine Carter Rowe, beneficiaries of the family trust. Charitable donations, listed, itemized, strategic. And then, near the end, a sentence so small it almost hid itself. All prior provisions made for Claire Monroe Carter are hereby revoked. No explanation, no rationale, just erased. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my laptop across the room. I didn't even cry. I closed the document, reopened it, and checked the metadata. It had been edited 2 weeks before the wedding. The same week, my father had called me into his office to talk about seating arrangements. That timing wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. I sat there in the quiet hum of my refrigerator, my phone face down on the counter, and felt the strangest sensation. Like I had stepped out of a room I didn't realize I'd been locked inside. So this was the truth. The wedding hadn't been about love or unity or family pride. It had been a soft launch, a public declaration of succession. Elaine wasn't just getting married. She was being installed, and I was surplus. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I reviewed contracts, flagged discrepancies, sent emails no one would ever thank me for. The world did not stop spinning just because my parents had decided I no longer existed on paper. At lunch, I called a lawyer. Not the dramatic kind. No confrontation, no accusations. I searched for a state litigation attorney, Columbus, Ohio, and picked a firm with boring branding and serious faces on their website. Her name was Judith Palmer, early 60s, gray bob, voice like she'd seen everything and still slept fine at night. "Tell me exactly how you received the document," she said after I explained. "I wasn't meant to," I replied. "It was emailed by mistake." She hummed. I forwarded the email. She called me back an hour later. "You know this doesn't mean you get nothing automatically," she said. "It means they intend for you to get nothing." What options do I have?" I asked. "Right now?" "Observation," she said. "Information. Documentation. Do not confront them. Do not tip your hand. Families like this close ranks when challenged." That phrase stayed with me. Families like this. I asked her one more question. "If they pass tomorrow, could I contest it?" "Yes," she said. But inheritance cases aren't just about money. They're about leverage. Timing matters. I thanked her and hung up. That night, my mother called. Claire, she said brightly, we were thinking Christmas at the house this year. Elaine and Daniel will be coming in early. You should come too. The audacity was almost impressive. I'll let you know, I said. She paused. Everything okay? You've been distant. I pictured the will, the signature lines, my absence. I've been busy, I replied. She accepted that easily. Busy was the excuse she preferred. It made my absence feel voluntary. Christmas came and went without me. I told them I had a work deadline. Elaine sent a photo of the family in front of the fireplace. Matching sweaters, champagne flutes raised. I noticed the mantle. The wedding photo was framed in silver, centered, large. No childhood photos anymore. No group shots. Just Elaine and Daniel, smiling like the future had already signed over the deed. January brought a new development. My father announced he was stepping back from daily operations at Carter Development Group. Elaine would be taking on a more active role. She had no construction background, no finance training, but she had a husband with a law degree and a last name that played well in boardrooms. At a family dinner I reluctantly attended, Elaine talked about streamlining the company. Modernizing leadership, she said, cutting into her steak. Dad's methods are outdated. My father smiled proudly. I watched them the way you watch a storm from indoors. Detached. Alert. After dinner, as I helped my mother clear plates, she leaned in. Elaine mentioned you might be interested in selling your shares. I froze. My shares? I asked. She frowned slightly. In the company. Your grandfather left you a small percentage years ago. You don't really need it, do you? My grandfather. The only one who'd ever asked what I wanted. No, I said slowly. I don't need to sell. Her smile tightened. Well, just think about it. It would make things simpler. Simpler for whom, she didn't say. That night, I dug through old files, tax documents, trust statements. I found it. A minority stake. Small, but not insignificant. And suddenly, the will made sense. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about control. Elaine couldn't fully own the company while I existed on the ledger. The next week, Elaine called me. Hey, she said, voice syrupy. I heard you talk to Mom about the shares. I didn't, I replied. Well, Daniel and I were thinking, she continued, ignoring that. It might be time for you to cash out. Focus on your life, your career. I pictured the invitation without my name, the family photo without my face, the will without my existence. I'm not selling, I said. Her tone changed instantly. Don't be difficult, Claire. I'm not, I said. I'm being precise. Silence. Then, colder. You don't want to make this uncomfortable. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. You already did, I said. When I hung up, my phone buzzed with a notification. Email. From my father's assistant again. Subject line. Board meeting. Attendance required. They were moving faster now, and for the first time, I realized something else. They weren't just excluding me. They were preparing to push me out completely. The board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. at Carter Development Group's headquarters downtown. I hadn't been inside that building in almost 5 years, not since my grandfather's funeral, when my father had stood at the podium and talked about legacy while already rewriting it in his head. I arrived early, not to be polite, but to observe. The lobby looked the same. Polished marble floors, framed aerial photos of projects lining the walls. My grandfather's name still engraved on a brass plaque near the elevator, though his influence had been reduced to decoration, just like me. Elaine arrived 10 minutes late, heels clicking, Daniel at her side. She kissed my father on the cheek, hugged my mother, and glanced at me like I was part of the furniture. Claire, she said, surprised. You came. You required attendance, I replied. She smiled thinly. Of course. The boardroom smelled faintly of coffee and expensive cologne. 8 seats around the table, my father at the head. Elaine to his right, Daniel beside her, even though he wasn't technically on the board. My chair was at the far end. That placement told me everything. The meeting began with updates, financials, projections, expansion plans. Elaine spoke confidently, using buzzwords she'd clearly practiced. Daniel chimed in occasionally, framing suggestions as legal considerations. Then my father cleared his throat. "There's one more item," he said. "A restructuring proposal." He nodded to Elaine. She slid a folder across the table. Not to me, past me, to the board members on her side. "We believe," she said, "the consolidating ownership will allow for cleaner decision-making." I opened my copy. The language was careful, polished, designed to sound reasonable. They wanted to convert minority shares into a buyout, compulsory under a new operating agreement. Fair market value, determined by an appraiser they'd already selected. In other words, they were forcing me out. "This removes potential conflicts," Elaine continued, looking everywhere but at me, "and positions the company for future growth." I raised my hand slightly. The room went quiet. "Yes, Claire?" my father said. "The way you speak to a child, asking a question you've already decided the answer to." "I don't consent," I said. Elaine exhaled sharply. "This isn't personal." "It is," I replied. "You're removing my ownership." Daniel leaned forward. "Legally, the board can proceed if the majority agrees." I looked around the table. Familiar faces, men who'd known me since I was a teenager, who'd attended my grandfather's funeral, who'd watched me sit quietly through meetings for years. No one met my eyes. "That answers my question," I said. My father spoke again. "Claire, you don't have the background to contribute meaningfully here. This is about efficiency." I nodded. "Then why did Grandpa leave me shares?" A pause. Uncomfortable. "He believed in fairness," my father said finally. "And you believe in return on investment," I said. Elaine's jaw tightened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I closed the folder. "You're right. You are." I stood. "I'll have my attorney review this," I said calmly. "Any further communication should go through her." Daniel scoffed quietly. "You're overreacting." I looked at him for the first time. Really looked. "This is my grandfather's company," I said, "and my last connection to a family that's already written me out of everything else. I'm not overreacting. I'm responding." I walked out without waiting for permission. In the elevator, my hands finally shook. Not from fear, from adrenaline. From the realization that the ground beneath me had been unstable for years, and I'd just acknowledged. Judith Palmer called me back within hours of receiving the documents. "They're not subtle," she said, "but they are sloppy." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they assumed you wouldn't fight," she replied, "and assumptions are expensive." Over the next few weeks, my life split into two parallel tracks. By day, I worked my job. Compliance reviews, quiet competence, stability. By night, I became a student of my own family's business. Judith requested records, old shareholder agreements, meeting minutes, trust documents tied to my grandfather's estate. I spent evenings digging through boxes in my apartment, scanning yellowed papers I hadn't touched in a decade. That's when I found it. A handwritten note from my grandfather, tucked inside an old binder. "Claire understands details. Details protect people." I stared at those words for a long time. The more Judith uncovered, the clearer the picture became. My grandfather had structured the company intentionally. Minority shares weren't symbolic. They came with veto power on specific decisions. Decisions like forced buyouts. Elaine and Daniel had either missed that or hoped I wouldn't notice. They were wrong. Judith drafted a formal response. Polite, firm, unyielding. Within 24 hours, my father called. "This is unnecessary," he said. "You're embarrassing the family." "I wasn't invited to the family meeting," I replied. He sighed. "What do you want, Claire?" The question landed heavier than he realized. "I want you to stop pretending this isn't what it is," I said. "You chose Elaine. You always have. I accepted that. But you don't get to erase me quietly and call it efficiency." Silence. Then, colder. "If you continue this, there will be consequences." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm prepared." The consequences came faster than I expected. 2 days later, HR from my company called me in. "There's been a concern raised," the director said carefully, "about a potential conflict of interest." I already knew where this was coming from. "Your family's company is under review," she continued. "We just need to clarify some things." Elaine wasn't just pushing me out of the family business. She was trying to destabilize the one place I still had footing. That was when I realized something crucial. They weren't reacting emotionally. They were executing a plan. And for the first time, I stopped seeing myself as the problem. I was an obstacle, and obstacles in my family were removed. The HR meeting ended with polite smiles and a promise to circle back. That phrase always sounds harmless until you've lived long enough to know it means someone else is now in control of the clock. I drove home with my phone on silent, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed space to think without interference. Elaine had always relied on speed and pressure, flood the system, force mistakes. She'd learned that from watching our father negotiate contracts. I wasn't going to give her either. That night, I wrote everything down. Dates, conversations, emails, board motions, the will attachment, the HR inquiry. Not as a diary, but as a timeline. Facts only. No adjectives. No emotion. Judith had said something that stuck with me. When people move this fast, it's because they think time is on their side. I intended to take that away from them. The next morning, I emailed HR a single sentence. Please direct all questions regarding potential conflicts of interest to my legal counsel. Contact information attached. I CC'd Judith. Then I went to work like nothing was happening. I didn't ask coworkers if they'd heard anything. I didn't defend myself. I didn't speculate. I did my job thoroughly and quietly, the same way I always had. Silence unsettles people who expect panic. By Friday, the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Not hostile, cautious. Someone had said something. Not enough to accuse me, but enough to make me interesting. That evening, Elaine texted me. You didn't have to bring lawyers into this. I didn't reply. An hour later, my mother called. I don't understand why you're being so cold, she said. Elaine's under a lot of stress. I stood at my kitchen window, watching traffic move steadily below. I'm not cold, I said. I'm quiet. Well, she replied, it feels punitive. That word made me laugh. A short sound, sharp. You removed me from your will, I said. You tried to force me out of the company. You interfered with my employment. And my silence feels punitive? She inhaled, preparing to reframe. I just don't recognize you anymore, she said. I did. That was the difference. The first real crack appeared a week later. Judith called me at 7:12 a.m. They underestimated your grandfather, she said. What does that mean? I asked. It means the trust he set up for your shares includes a clause Elaine can't touch. If the company attempts to coerce a buyout, the shares automatically convert into voting stock with expanded oversight rights. I sat down. Expanded how? Access to internal audits, she said, including historical financial records. My family had spent decades avoiding scrutiny by keeping things just clean enough. Now I had a key they'd forgotten existed. Judith didn't rush. She filed notices, requested documents, followed procedure to the letter. The company's legal team pushed back, delayed, claimed administrative backlog. Then something changed. A junior accountant reached out anonymously, not to me, to Judith. There were discrepancies, small ones, buried. Adjustments that shifted liabilities forward and back between entities. Nothing explosive on its own, but patterns matter. Judith didn't accuse. She asked questions. The board postponed meetings. Elaine stopped posting on social media. Daniel's firm quietly removed their association with Carter Development from their website. At work, HR called me back in. This matter appears to be external, the director said. We're closing our review. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just closure. I nodded. Thank you. When I left her office, my phone buzzed. Elaine again. You're enjoying this, she wrote. I stared at the screen. Enjoyment had nothing to do with it. I typed one sentence. I'm protecting myself. She didn't respond. 2 days later, my father showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked older, not frail, just tired, in a way I hadn't seen before. You're putting the company at risk, he said, without sitting down. You already did, I replied. He frowned. This audit, these questions. Investors are nervous. That's what transparency does, I said. He rubbed his temples. Elaine's heartbroken. I studied him. The man who taught me how to ride a bike. The man who told me, when I was 14, that being smart was good, but being impressive was better. She's frustrated, I said. There's a difference. He looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to reconcile the daughter he'd dismissed with the woman sitting across from him. You could stop this, he said quietly. So could you, I replied. He left without another word. That night, Judith forwarded me a preliminary report. Nothing illegal. Not yet. But aggressive accounting. Creative structures. Risky exposure. Enough to scare banks. Enough to shift power. Elaine called the next morning. Her voice was tight, controlled. Let's meet, she said. Just us. We met at a cafe halfway between our homes. Neutral territory. Public enough to keep things civil. She arrived early. No makeup. No designer bag. Just a coat pulled tight around her. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said. I believed her. Partially. It always goes this far, I replied. You just didn't expect me to follow. She leaned forward. What do you want? The same question my father had asked. This time, I had an answer. I want out, I said. Cleanly. On my terms. Her eyes flickered. You said you wouldn't sell. I said I wouldn't be forced, I corrected. There's a difference. We talked for an hour. Numbers, conditions, silence between sentences. She agreed to terms she would have laughed at a month ago, because now the clock wasn't on her side. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. You know Mom will never forgive you, she said. I put on my coat. She taught me that forgiveness is conditional. Outside, the air was sharp and clear. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. But I knew this wasn't over. Because families like mine don't surrender quietly. They regroup. And Elaine had just realized something dangerous. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. The draft agreement arrived 3 days after my meeting with Elaine. Judith sent it with no commentary, which I'd learned meant one thing: read slowly. I printed the document and spread the pages across my dining table like a map. Terms were clean, precise. A voluntary exit framed as a strategic divestment. A buyout price well above the fair market value they tried to force on me weeks earlier. Confidentiality clauses. Non-disparagement. A timeline. And one line that mattered more than the money. Upon execution, all attempts to amend, challenge, or otherwise alter the trust provisions related to Claire Monroe Carter shall cease permanently. They weren't just buying my shares, they were buying certainty. I called Judith. They're scared, she said. That's why this is generous. Is it enough? I asked. That depends, she replied, on what you want after. I thought about that. After. The word felt unfamiliar. For years, I'd lived in anticipation, of approval, of inclusion, of being chosen. Now I was planning beyond them. It's enough, I said, with one condition. Judith waited. I want the payment structured over time, I continued, and I want oversight language tied to the first tranche. If they violate the agreement, payments accelerate. She smiled through the phone. I could hear it. That's not emotional, she said. That's practical. That evening, my mother called again. Her voice was softer this time. Measured. Elaine told me you're negotiating, she said. I am, I replied. I don't understand why it has to be so adversarial. I leaned back in my chair. You didn't think removing me from your will was adversarial. That was administrative, she said. There it was. The same word my father had used. Efficiency, administration. Language designed to strip decisions of responsibility. I'm not angry, I said. I'm responding. She was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, this isn't how families handle conflict. I almost laughed. This is how our family handles it, I said. Just not usually with witnesses. The agreement was signed the following week. We met in a conference room at Judith's firm. Elaine arrived with Daniel and 2 attorneys. I arrived alone. That imbalance bothered her. I could see it in the way her eyes kept flicking to the empty chair beside me. She wanted me to look supported by someone impressive. I didn't need to. We signed, pens moving in unison. No speeches, no apologies. When it was done, Elaine slid the folder toward me. I hope this gives you what you need, she said. It gives me what I asked for, I replied. Daniel extended his hand. No hard feelings. I shook it. None. That wasn't entirely true. But feelings weren't driving this anymore. As I left the building, something unexpected happened. Relief didn't rush in. Instead, there was a hollow space. Quiet. like a room after furniture has been removed. I'd spent so long bracing against them that I hadn't considered what it would feel like when the pressure stopped. At work, things normalized quickly. Too quickly. Colleagues stopped whispering. My manager invited me to lunch. HR sent a polite email thanking me for my cooperation. The system had absorbed the disruption and smoothed itself over. That's what systems do. The real shift happened internally. I stopped checking my phone compulsively, stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen, stopped explaining myself in my head to people who had already decided who I was. One afternoon, as I was packing up to leave, my manager stopped by my desk. "We're opening a senior compliance role," she said. "More authority, more visibility. I'd like you to apply." I looked at her. "Why?" She didn't hesitate. "Because when things got uncomfortable, you didn't flinch." That night, I went home and poured a glass of wine I'd been saving for no particular reason. I sat by the window and watched the city lights come on, one by one. For the first time, my life wasn't defined by proximity to my family. I thought about Christmas, about how I'd always twisted myself into shapes that fit their table. I texted Elaine one final message. "The agreement is executed. Please route all future communication through council." She replied with a single word. "Understood." It was the same word she'd once used to erase me from a conversation. This time, it didn't sting. 2 weeks later, the first payment hit my account. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone. I transferred a portion into savings and used the rest to pay off my student loans in one quiet afternoon. That felt better than any toast. The second tranche was scheduled for 6 months later, which was when the trouble started. Judith called me on a Thursday morning. "Something's off," she said. "What now?" I asked. "They've delayed document delivery. Again." I closed my eyes. Which documents? Internal audit materials, the ones tied to the oversight clause. Elaine was testing the fence. Judith sent a formal notice of breach. Within hours, my father called. Not to threaten, not to negotiate, to plead. "This is spiraling," he said. "Banks are asking questions. Investors are nervous." I listened. "You don't want this," he continued. "You've made your point." "I didn't make a point," I replied. "I set a boundary." There was a difference. He still didn't understand that. "Call off the oversight," he said. "We'll pay the rest immediately." I thought about it, about how easy it would be to say yes, to take the money and disappear. And then I remembered my grandfather's note. "Details protect people." "No," I said. "You'll comply, or the clause activates." Silence. "You'd really do this to us?" he asked. I answered honestly. "You already did this to me." When I hung up, my hands were steady. I realized then that the revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't humiliating speeches or public confrontations. It was structure. It was insisting on the rules they'd assumed only applied to others. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't just about money or shares or wills. It was about something far more dangerous to them. I was no longer manageable. The invitation arrived in mid-November, thick and heavy, like it carried importance by weight alone. Cream envelope, gold trim. My name handwritten this time, carefully, deliberately, as if the extra ink could undo years of omission. "Christmas Eve dinner at the Carter residence," it read. "Family only." I stared at it for a long moment before setting it down on the counter. This was new. Not the holiday, not the house, but the timing. The oversight clause had been triggered 2 weeks earlier. Judith's second notice had gone unanswered. The accelerated payment deadline loomed. Banks were requesting clarifications that couldn't be delayed with polite emails anymore. And suddenly, I was family again. My mother called the next day. "We'd really love to have you," she said, voice warm, careful. "It's been too long." I pictured the dining room table, the one with 12 chairs, always arranged so Elaine sat closest to my father. The one where I'd learned early which seats were ornamental. "I'll think about it," I said. She exhaled in relief, already counting that as a yes. That night, Judith and I spoke. "They're trying to reset the narrative," she said. "Holidays are useful that way." "I know," I replied. "Do you want to go?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to see it, to sit in that house again, not as a child hoping to be chosen, but as an adult who no longer needed their approval. Another part of me knew that proximity had always been their favorite tool. "I won't decide yet," I said. The week before Christmas, the pressure increased. Elaine texted. Mom's really trying. Daniel emailed. Would be good to clear the air before the end of the year. My father sent a message that surprised me. I should have handled things differently. No apology, no acknowledgement of specifics. Just a vague admission designed to sound reflective without conceding ground. Judith reviewed it and said one sentence that settled everything. They're offering emotion in exchange for leverage. That was it. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. I stayed home. I cooked myself a small dinner. Simple, intentional. I didn't check my phone. At 8:42 p.m., my mother left a voicemail. Her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. We saved your seat, she said. I deleted it. The next morning, Christmas Day, Judith called. They've transferred the remaining balance, she said. All of it. Early. Unconditional. They're hoping that fixes things, she added. I opened my banking app. The numbers were real. Complete. They think money restores access, I said. Yes, she replied. It always has for them. I thanked her and hung up. For the first time since this began, there was nothing left to negotiate. No clauses, no deadlines, no leverage on either side, just distance. Elaine didn't reach out again. Neither did Daniel. My father sent one final email in January. I hope you'll reconsider being part of this family. I read it once. Then I archived it. That winter, something shifted in me. Without the constant tension, my body relaxed in ways I hadn't realized it was holding. I slept better, ate slower, stopped anticipating criticism in ordinary conversations. At work, I applied for the senior role. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell anyone. I interviewed calmly, answered questions directly, didn't minimize my contributions the way I used to. When they asked how I handled conflict, I didn't speak about compromise. I spoke about clarity. I got the promotion in February. A quiet email. A new title. A salary adjustment that felt less important than the trust behind it. I celebrated by taking a day off and walking through a park near my apartment. No destination, no agenda. That was when I saw my grandmother's old ring on my hand and realized something else had changed. I was no longer waiting for permission to belong. In March, the call came, not from my parents, from an unfamiliar number. This is Margaret Ellis, the woman said. I'm calling regarding your grandfather, Thomas Carter. I stopped walking. I work with the county probate archives, she continued. We're reviewing historical filings related to an old trust amendment. Your name came up. My grandfather again. Always him, she explained slowly, carefully. There had been a secondary trust, smaller, separate from the company, intended as a personal safeguard. It had never been activated because the primary heirs were supposed to honor certain conditions that had been violated. Your grandfather anticipated conflict, she said. He structured contingencies. I closed my eyes. What does that mean? I asked. It means you may be entitled to more than you were ever told about, she replied. The paperwork arrived a week later. Old, detailed, precise. My grandfather had left me authority over a parcel of land tied to one of the company's earliest developments. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't public, but it came with rights. Rights that had never been exercised because no one thought I'd look. Judith reviewed it and smiled. They didn't just underestimate you, she said. They forgot him. The land sat unused, zoned for redevelopment, quietly appreciating. I didn't rush. I waited. And in that waiting, I understood the full shape of what had happened. My family hadn't just tried to exclude me. They'd assumed I would remain passive. That assumption had been their greatest mistake. Because now, without anger, without urgency, without the need to prove anything, I was holding something they couldn't touch, and they didn't even know it yet. The land sat 30 miles outside the city, just past a stretch of highway my grandfather had helped design in the late 70s. I drove there on a gray Saturday morning in early April, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see it with my own eyes. It wasn't marked by signs or fences, just a long, uneven boundary of old trees and a rusted gate leaning slightly inward, like it had been waiting to be acknowledged. Judith had warned me not to underestimate it. Developers forget about parcels like this, she said, until they don't. The zoning documents were clear. Mixed use potential, adjacent infrastructure, quiet value that grows when no one is watching. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets and thought about my grandfather. How he used to say that land was different from money. Money moved. Land waited. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell Elaine. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I hired a local surveyor, an environmental consultant, a zoning attorney who specialized in municipal negotiations. I didn't rush the process. I listened, asked questions, took notes. The more I learned, the more obvious it became why my grandfather had structured things this way. This parcel sat at the edge of a future expansion corridor. Not today, not next year, but soon. And Carter Development Group had already submitted preliminary interest paperwork with the city, without realizing they didn't own it. The realization didn't make me smile. It made me still. Judith confirmed it 2 days later. They assumed the parcel was still held under the family umbrella, she said. They never updated the title. What happens when they find out? I asked. They can't proceed without your consent, she replied. And they've already signaled intent. Intent. Another word that sounds neutral, until it isn't. I thought about Elaine's confidence, the way she'd spoken about streamlining, about modernizing leadership, about positioning the company for the future. She'd been standing on land that wasn't hers. The city scheduled a preliminary planning meeting in May. Carter Development was listed as the presenting party. So was I. Judith raised an eyebrow when she saw the notice. They'll be surprised, she said. I nodded. So will I. The weeks leading up to the meeting were quiet. Almost too quiet. No calls, no emails, no sudden gestures of reconciliation. It was as if my family had decided the best way to handle me was to pretend I'd already been resolved. I let them. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early again. Old habits, new purpose. Elaine was there with a team. Architects, consultants, a city liaison she greeted by name. She didn't see me at first. When she did, her expression froze, just for a second. Claire, she said, recovering quickly. I didn't realize you'd be attending. I was invited, I replied. Daniel stepped closer. This is a private development discussion. I handed him my badge. Property owner. He read it twice. Elaine's smile tightened. There must be some confusion. There isn't, I said. The meeting began. Elaine presented first. Slides, projections, a vision for a mixed-use development that would revitalize the corridor and honor the legacy of Carter Development. I watched the city officials nod, ask questions, engage. Then it was my turn. I didn't present slides. I spoke simply. I own the parcel being discussed, I said. I'm evaluating long-term options. Elaine's head snapped toward me. I'm not opposed to development, I continued, but I'm not interested in rushed decisions or unilateral assumptions. The room shifted. Questions followed, directed at me, about timeline, about intent, about my willingness to negotiate. I answered carefully, calmly, without committing to anything. When the meeting ended, Elaine pulled me aside. What are you doing? She asked, her voice low. I'm considering my options, I replied. You know this affects the company, she said. I know, I replied. That land was part of the plan, she said, frustration leaking through. It was never part of your plan, I said. You just assumed it was. She stared at me, searching for something. Anger, gloating, revenge. She found none. This doesn't have to be adversarial, she said. I almost smiled. It always was, I replied. You just didn't notice when I was losing. That night, my father called. The first time in months. Why didn't you tell us? He asked. Because you didn't ask, I replied. He sighed. This is complicated. No, I said. It's clear. He lowered his voice. Elaine's project depends on that land. Then she should have checked the deed, I said. There was a pause. Then, softer. What do you want? The question, again. I didn't answer immediately. I want to be treated as an equal, I said finally. Not as a liability, not as an inconvenience, as someone whose consent matters. He was quiet. I don't think Elaine will agree to that, he said. I know, I replied. That's why this conversation is happening now. The next morning, Judith forwarded me an email. Elaine's legal team requested a formal negotiation, not a buyout, a partnership. I read it twice. The tables weren't just turning. They were rearranging. I agreed to meet, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see how far they'd go once they realized I couldn't be ignored. And as I closed my laptop, One thought settled in with absolute certainty. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about authorship. For the first time in my life, I was writing the terms. The negotiation was scheduled for a Friday morning in June, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the river. Carter Development had chosen the location. Neutral, modern, expensive. A visual reminder of what they believed they still controlled. I arrived 10 minutes early. Elaine arrived exactly on time. My father was already there, seated at the head of the table, out of habit more than authority. Daniel sat to Elaine's right. Two attorneys I hadn't met before arranged their folders with deliberate precision. Judith sat beside me, calm, unreadable. No one offered coffee. That told me everything. Elaine opened the conversation. "We appreciate your willingness to meet," she said, voice polished. "We believe there's a mutually beneficial path forward." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "I'm listening," I said. She launched into the proposal. A joint development agreement. Carter Development would handle construction and financing. I would contribute the land. Profit split to be determined. Oversight committees. Advisory roles. It sounded generous, if you didn't know how these things worked. Judith flipped through the documents slowly. "This structure places all operational control with Carter Development," she said, "and all risk with my client." Elaine smiled tightly. "That's standard." "It's convenient," Judith replied. Daniel leaned forward. "Claire, you don't have experience in development. This protects you." I met his eyes. "From what?" He hesitated. "From exposure." I nodded. "That's interesting. Because the exposure exists whether I participate or not. The difference is whether I'm compensated for it." My father cleared his throat. "We're trying to include you." I turned to him. "You're trying to contain me." The room went still. Elaine exhaled sharply. "What do you want, Claire?" "Numbers. Terms. Say it." I folded my hands on the table. "I want majority voting rights on any project involving my land," I said. "Independent audit access, and a profit structure that reflects contribution, not hierarchy." Daniel laughed quietly. "That's unrealistic." Judith slid a document across the table. "Then this meeting is unnecessary," she said. Elaine picked it up, scanned the first page, and froze. "What is this?" she asked. "A development proposal," Judith replied. "From a competing firm." I watched something change in Elaine's face. Not anger. Calculation. "You shopped the land," she said. "Yes," I replied. "You told us you were considering options." "I was," I said. "This is one of them." My father looked between us. "You'd really walk away from the family business?" I didn't hesitate. I already did. The truth landed harder than any accusation. Elaine set the paper down slowly. "What do they offer?" she asked. "Control," I replied. "Transparency. And respect." She leaned back, studying me. "You've changed," she said. "No," I replied. I stopped adapting. The negotiation shifted then. The tone changed. Voices softened. Numbers adjusted. They offered more. Conceded oversight. Reluctantly acknowledged my authority. But it still wasn't enough. "Final term," I said, standing. "I want a clause that prevents my name, image, or history from being used in any marketing, legacy materials, or public statements without my written consent." Elaine blinked. "Why?" "Because I won't be used to rehabilitate a story I wasn't allowed to be part of," I said. Silence. Then my father nodded slowly. "That's fair," he said. Elaine looked at him, incredulous. He didn't look back. The agreement wasn't signed that day, but something else was. An acknowledgement. They needed me, and I no longer needed them. 2 weeks later, the city approved the preliminary zoning change, with my signature, not theirs. That was when the calls started. Developers, investors, consultants who suddenly knew my name. I didn't answer most of them. I chose carefully. Eventually, I selected a firm that had nothing to do with Carter Development. Smaller, slower, transparent. We drafted a new plan, one that prioritized sustainability over speed, community over branding. Carter Development was invited to participate. As a contractor, Elaine didn't take the news well. She called me late one night. "You're cutting us out," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm placing you appropriately." She was quiet. "You think this makes you powerful," she said. I considered that. "No," I said. It makes me free. The project moved forward without drama. The press coverage was modest, local, focused on economic impact, not family legacy. My name appeared once, as owner. That was enough. At work, my promotion came with a new office, a window, a sense of permanence. Colleagues asked about my family less. I answered honestly when they did. "We're not close," I said. And for the first time, that felt like a statement, not an apology. One evening, as I reviewed project documents at home, my phone buzzed. A text from Elaine. "I didn't think you'd go this far," I typed back slowly. "I didn't think I'd have to." She didn't reply. Later that night, I stood by my window and watched the city lights reflect on the river. The quiet felt earned. I thought about how power had always been something my family wielded over me. Through money, through silence, through exclusion. Now, power looked different. It looked like choice. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my chest, that the hardest part was still coming. Because the moment you stop being controllable, people don't just adjust, they react. And Elaine had never been good at losing. Elaine filed the lawsuit on a Monday morning in July, at exactly 9:03 a.m. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted it to feel official. I learned that later, from one of the attorneys who quietly stepped away from her team weeks afterward. Elaine believed timing created authority, that if she struck first and loudly enough, I would fold. The notification came through Judith. "Breach of fiduciary duty," she read aloud. "Interference with business expectancy. Unjust enrichment." I listened without reacting, the way you listen to bad weather forecasts when you're already indoors. "They're claiming," Judith continued, "that you intentionally withheld information about the land to damage Carter development." I almost smiled. "Withheld?" I said. "From people who never asked." "Yes," she replied. "That's the argument." Elaine wasn't trying to win on facts. She was trying to exhaust me, drown me in paperwork, force me into settlements just to make the noise stop. It was the same strategy my father had used with subcontractors for decades. Delay, pressure, attrition. What Elaine didn't understand was this. I was no longer afraid of losing access. I'd already lost everything they could take from me emotionally. There was nothing left to threaten. Judith moved quickly. Motions to dismiss, requests for discovery that cut deeper than Elaine anticipated. Financial records, internal communications, emails discussing the land before the meeting. Within days, Carter Development's legal team began pushing back. Not aggressively, defensively. That was the first tell. The second came when Daniel stopped returning Elaine's calls. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that his firm had raised concerns about reputational exposure. Lawsuits involving family disputes, favoritism, and contested inheritance didn't play well with corporate clients. Daniel was pragmatic. Always had been. He stepped away from representing the company within a week. Elaine replaced him with outside counsel. Expensive, aggressive, less familiar with the history. That helped me. Discovery began in August. Elaine's emails told a story she hadn't realized she was writing. Assumptions, dismissals, casual references to cleaning up loose ends. A message to her consultant 6 months earlier stood out. "Claire doesn't really have the stomach for this stuff. She'll cave." Judith flagged it with a yellow highlight. "Intent," she said. Judges noticed that. The stress started showing publicly. Elaine missed a city council meeting. Carter Development delayed unrelated projects. Rumors circulated about internal disagreements. My father didn't call. My mother sent a card. No message. Just her name. I placed it in a drawer and closed it without opening. At work, my life remained steady, structured, predictable. That contrast mattered. Elaine was spiraling because she'd lost control of the narrative. I was grounded because I'd stopped needing one. The deposition was scheduled for September. Elaine went first. Judith attended. I didn't. I sat at my desk, reviewing compliance files, while my sister tried to explain, under oath, why she'd never bothered to confirm ownership of a multi-million-dollar parcel before pitching it to the city. When Judith called me afterward, her voice was calm. She contradicted herself twice, she said, and blamed Dad once. I closed my laptop. How did he take that? He wasn't there, she replied. But it's in the transcript. My deposition followed a week later. I wore a simple gray suit. No jewelry, no makeup beyond the basics. I answered every question carefully, factually, without commentary. Did I know the land was valuable? Yes. Did I inform Carter Development? No. Why not? Because no one asked, I said, and because ownership records are public. The opposing counsel frowned. You're saying you had no obligation? I'm saying responsibility doesn't transfer through assumption, I replied. The judge denied Elaine's motion for summary judgment 2 weeks later. That was when panic set in. Elaine called me that night. For the first time in months, her voice wasn't polished. This has gone too far, she said. You filed the lawsuit, I replied. I was angry, she said. You embarrassed me. I leaned back against my kitchen counter. No. I stopped covering for you. Silence. Then, quietly, what do you want? The question, again, but this time, it came without confidence. I want this resolved, I said, and I want it on record that I did nothing wrong. She exhaled shakily. Dad's health isn't great. That was new. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it in the limited way one can. If this goes to trial, she continued, it'll destroy him. I thought about my father. His silence, his calculated distance, his willingness to let Elaine do what she wanted, as long as it protected the family image. I didn't choose this path, I said. But I won't lie to save someone else's pride. She whispered my name, the way she had when we were kids, and she needed something. I didn't respond. 2 days later, Judith received a settlement offer. They wanted to withdraw the lawsuit. Publicly. Quietly. In exchange, they asked for one thing, a statement. A simple acknowledgement that the dispute was a misunderstanding between family members. Judith looked at me over her glasses. This is where people usually compromise, she said. I shook my head slowly. I won't rewrite the truth to make them comfortable, I said. They've done that enough. She nodded. Then we counter. Our response was brief. Lawsuit withdrawn. Written acknowledgement of sole ownership. Reimbursement of legal fees. No statement. They agreed within 48 hours. Elaine didn't call after that. The court docket updated quietly. Case dismissed with prejudice. Permanent. The fallout was subtle but real. Investors stepped back. Carter Development lost a key municipal contract. Elaine stopped attending public events. My father finally emailed. I never wanted this to become public. I stared at the words for a long time. I never wanted to become invisible, I typed back. He didn't reply. That fall, the land development broke ground. Not with a ribbon cutting, not with speeches, just machinery, movement, progress. I stood at the edge of the site one morning, hard hat on, watching something real take shape. For the first time, I wasn't reacting, I was building. And somewhere behind all the legal filings, family history, and broken assumptions, a simple truth settled in. They had tried to break me by turning my life into a battlefield. Instead, they'd handed me clarity. And clarity is dangerous to people who rely on control. My father died on a Wednesday in late November. Not suddenly, not dramatically. The kind of slow decline that gives everyone time to prepare, except the people who need it most. Heart complications, compounded by stress his doctors had warned him about for years. I heard the news from a former board member before anyone in my family called me. That detail mattered. Elaine left a voicemail an hour later. Her voice was composed, efficient. Dad passed this morning. Services are Saturday. Let me know if you're coming. No emotion, no invitation. Just logistics. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. I wasn't overwhelmed with grief. That surprised me at first. Then I understood why. You can't mourn what you were slowly trained to let go of. I decided to go, not for closure, not for reconciliation, for clarity. The funeral was held at a stone church my parents had attended for decades. High ceilings, dark wood pews, the kind of place where legacy feels heavier than air. I arrived alone, dressed simply, and took a seat near the back. Elaine sat in the front row with our mother. Daniel was not there. That told me more than any eulogy could. People turned when they noticed me. Some nodded politely, others looked surprised. A few looked uncomfortable, as if my presence complicated the narrative they'd already settled on. The service followed the usual script. Stories about leadership, about vision, about how my father had built something from nothing. No one mentioned his daughters by name. When the pastor opened the floor for brief remarks, Elaine stood. She spoke about sacrifice, about family, about how much her father had believed in unity. I listened carefully. Not for lies, for omissions. My mother cried quietly beside her. Then, unexpectedly, the pastor looked out over the congregation. "Is there anyone else who would like to share?" he asked. Elaine stiffened. I didn't move at first. I hadn't planned to speak. But something in the room shifted. An opening. A pause that felt intentional. I stood. The sound of it rippled through the pews. I walked to the podium slowly. Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to arrive fully. "My name is Claire Carter," I said. "I'm Richard Carter's eldest daughter." A few heads snapped up. I didn't look at Elaine. "I won't speak about business," I continued, "or legacy. Others have covered that." I paused. "I want to speak about the man who taught me to read contracts before bedtime stories, who believed preparation was a form of love, even when he didn't always know how to show it." That was true. My father valued strength, sometimes to a fault. He believed that what survived deserved to survive. That belief shaped all of us. I let that sit. "We didn't always agree," I said. "But I learned from him that choices matter, and that they last." I nodded once. "Thank you." I stepped away. No accusations, no revelations, no confrontation. But the message was clear to anyone listening carefully. After the service, people approached me quietly. Old associates, former employees, a judge who'd once worked with my father on a zoning case. "I didn't know," they said, over and over. I didn't ask what they meant. Elaine cornered me near the exit. "That was unnecessary," she hissed. "It was honest," I replied. "This isn't the time," she said. "It never is," I replied. My mother stood a few steps behind her, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Or confusion at the realization that the daughter she'd minimized had grown beyond her reach. At the graveside, as people dispersed, my mother approached me alone. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I wanted to," I replied. She hesitated. "Your father, he was proud of you. He just didn't know how to say it." I met her eyes. "That's not something you say after someone dies," I said quietly. "It's something you show while they're alive." She looked away. The will was read the following week. I didn't attend. Judith did. She called me afterward. "You were mentioned," she said. I wasn't surprised. "Not financially," she added, "but by name. A statement. A clause acknowledging you as independent and not beholden to family business interests." I closed my eyes. "He knew," I said. "Yes," she replied. "He knew more than he let on." Elaine contested nothing. She was too busy managing perception. Too busy trying to keep the company steady under scrutiny. The development project on my land reached its next phase in December. A local paper ran a feature on sustainable planning. My name appeared again. Brief, neutral, no family mention. At work, I was asked to join an internal advisory board. A recognition of trust, not tenure. I accepted. That Christmas, I didn't receive an invitation. I didn't expect one. Instead, I hosted a small dinner for friends. Colleagues, people who knew me as I was, not as an extension of someone else's image. We laughed, ate too much, stayed late. At one point, someone asked if it was hard to walk away from family. I considered the question. "I didn't walk away," I said. I stopped chasing. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I thought about my father, about how complicated love can be when it's filtered through expectation and control. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. Because the real turning point hadn't been the lawsuit, or the negotiations, or the land. It was the moment I stopped needing them to see me. And that realization was about to matter more than I knew. Because inheritance isn't always about what you're given. Sometimes it's about what you refuse to carry forward. The call came in January, just as the new year had settled into something that felt permanent. Not hopeful. Not dramatic. Stable. I was at my desk reviewing a regulatory memo when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Old habits had changed. Urgency no longer controlled me. The voicemail was brief. "Claire, this is Martin Klein. I represent your mother. Please call me back when you have a moment." I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than necessary. Your mother. Not Beverly Carter. Not Mrs. Carter. Your mother. I didn't call back that day. That evening, I took a walk through the development site. The first structure was taking shape. Steel beams, measured progress. No rush, no panic. I thought about how many times my family had used intermediaries when direct conversation became inconvenient. Lawyers, assistants, advisors. Distance was their preferred language. The next morning, I called Judith. She's going to propose something, Judith said without hesitation. The question is whether it's reconciliation or consolidation. They sound similar, I said. They are, she replied. Until you read the fine print. I called Martin Klein that afternoon. Thank you for returning my call, he said smoothly. Your mother wanted me to explore a possibility with you. I'm listening, I said. She's considering revising her estate plan, he continued, given recent changes. There it was. The will again. Always the will. What kind of changes? I asked. She'd like to include you, he said, meaningfully. I leaned back in my chair. And in exchange? I asked. A pause. Fractional. Practiced. She hopes to restore family unity, he said, and avoid further division. Those are outcomes, I replied, not terms. Another pause. She'd like the land development placed under a family holding structure, he said. Long term. For legacy purposes. There it was. The offer wasn't about inclusion. It was about recapture. I won't be doing that, I said calmly. Perhaps you'd like to review a draft before deciding, he suggested. I don't need to, I replied. He cleared his throat. Claire, these things are complicated. Emotions aside. This has nothing to do with emotion, I interrupted, and everything to do with boundaries. He tried a different angle. Your mother is getting older, he said. She's concerned about what she leaves behind. She already decided that, I said, years ago. The call ended politely, professionally. That night, my mother emailed me directly. No subject line, just text. I don't want to die with things unfinished. I read it once. Then again, I didn't reply. Because unfinished, to her, meant unresolved, on her terms. To me, it meant something else entirely. A week later, Judith forwarded me the draft anyway. It was thorough, carefully structured. A trust that included me as the beneficiary. On paper, generous. But woven through the language were conditions. Shared governance, family oversight, reversion clauses, control, disguised as care. Judith highlighted a single paragraph. This is the hinge, she said. If you sign, you're back inside the system. I won't sign, I said. Do you want to counter? She asked. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, I said. I want to decline. Cleanly. She smiled softly. That's rarer than you think. I drafted the response myself. 2 sentences. I appreciate the consideration. I'm not interested in altering my current arrangements. I wish you well. No explanations. No justifications. The reply came the next day. Longer. Emotional. Unfiltered. You've become so rigid. This isn't who you used to be. I read that line several times. Then I deleted the email because it wasn't true. This was exactly who I'd always been. I'd just stopped bending. In February, the development received its final approval. Construction accelerated. Local coverage picked up again. A journalist reached out, asking about the family conflict behind the project. I declined the interview. I'm not telling a story, I said. I'm building something. At work, my advisory role expanded. I was asked to lead a cross-functional ethics review. Not because of my background, because of my judgment. That mattered. In March, my mother was hospitalized briefly. Nothing serious, a precaution. Elaine called me for the first time since the funeral. She keeps asking about you, she said. I closed my eyes. Is she asking? I replied. Or is she negotiating? Elaine didn't answer. I hope she's okay, I said. Truly, but I won't return to a dynamic that cost me myself. There was a long silence. Then Elaine said something I hadn't expected. She doesn't know how to meet you where you are. I considered that. That's not my responsibility anymore, I said. When we hung up, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. That spring, I did something I'd been postponing. I changed my last name. Not dramatically. Not publicly. I dropped Carter. I kept Monroe, my middle name. My grandmother's maiden name. The woman who taught me that dignity didn't need permission. The paperwork was simple. The effect was not. Seeing my new name on documents felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Judith noticed immediately. "That's a line you don't cross lightly," she said. "I crossed it a long time ago," I replied. "I just made it visible." The final message from my mother arrived in April. "I don't recognize you anymore." I read it. Then I typed one last response. "I finally do." And that was the end of it. Not because everything was resolved, but because I no longer needed resolution to move forward. What I'd learned over the past year wasn't how to win. It was how to choose. And that choice was about to shape the rest of my life. Because when you stop negotiating your worth, everything else rearranges itself around that truth. By the time summer arrived, my life had settled into something I didn't need to explain to anyone. Mornings were quiet. I woke early, not because I had to, but because I wanted the day to start on my terms. Coffee by the window, a quick scan of emails, then work that mattered. The kind where decisions had weight and consequences, and no one questioned whether I belonged in the room. The development project reached its first major milestone in June. Steel framed the skyline, where there had once been nothing but overgrown land and assumptions. I walked the site with the project manager, hard hat on, boots dusty, listening more than I spoke. "You've got good instincts," he said at one point. "You don't rush. That's rare." I nodded. Rushing is expensive. I didn't mean financially. The local paper ran another short piece. No mention of family drama, no backstory. Just progress, jobs created, plans moving forward. My name appeared again, attached to something real. That was enough. Elaine didn't reach out anymore. Neither did my mother. At first, I noticed the absence. Then I stopped measuring time by who wasn't filling it. In August, Judith and I closed the final oversight report. Everything clean, everything documented. She slid the folder across the table and smiled. "You're officially unentangled," she said. I ran my fingers over the cover. "I've been unentangled for a while. This just made it official." She leaned back. "You know, most people use the law to fight. You used it to leave." "I didn't want to win," I said. "I wanted to stop losing myself." That fall, something unexpected happened. I was invited to speak, not at a conference, not on a panel, at a small community college, to a room full of women in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Some changing careers, some rebuilding after divorce, some caring for parents who had never really cared for them. They didn't ask about my family. They asked how I knew when to stop negotiating. I told them the truth. "It wasn't one moment," I said. "It was a pattern. When every compromise moved me further from myself, I stopped calling it peace." Afterward, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes pulled me aside. "I thought I was cruel for setting boundaries with my parents," she said. "You make it sound sane." "It is," I replied. "It's just unfamiliar." That night, driving home, I thought about my mother, about how terrified she had always been of judgment, of what people would think, of losing status. I felt compassion, but compassion doesn't require proximity. In November, a letter arrived from the county. Property taxes adjusted. Increased valuation. Expected. I paid it without resentment. Ownership comes with responsibility. I'd learned that lesson honestly. On Thanksgiving morning, I cooked for myself again. This time, it didn't feel symbolic. It felt normal. I set the table for one, not because I was alone, but because I was complete. I thought about how many holidays I'd spent shrinking, editing my words, choosing seats carefully. Not this time. After dinner, I went for a walk. Leaves crunching underfoot, cold air sharp and clean. I realized something then that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Elaine, not at my parents, not even at myself. Anger had been a bridge. Useful. Temporary. I'd crossed it. In December, I received one final message. Not from my mother. From a distant cousin I barely knew. "I heard what happened," she wrote. "I wish I'd had your courage years ago." I stared at that line. Courage. I hadn't felt brave. I'd felt cornered. And then I'd chosen not to disappear. That's what people rarely talk about when they discuss revenge or justice or karma. It isn't about humiliating someone else. It's about refusing to participate in your own erasure. The last paperwork I signed that year wasn't legal or financial. It was personal. I updated my emergency contact, not family. A friend. Someone who showed up. Someone who didn't need leverage to care. When I looked at that form, I felt something settle into place. This was my life now. No open loops. No unresolved negotiations. Just choices. Clear and deliberate. If there's one thing I learned through all of this, it's this. Family drama doesn't begin with shouting. It begins with small exclusions you're expected to tolerate. Favoritism dressed up as practicality. Control disguised as concern. And revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it looks like signing the right document, making the quiet phone call, walking away without explaining yourself. Sometimes karma isn't watching someone else fall. It's standing upright after years of being told to sit down. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, minimized, or told your worth depended on staying convenient, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your peace? Leave a comment. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, stories about boundaries, betrayal, and what happens when the tables finally turn, make sure to like and subscribe, because choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. And sometimes it's the only inheritance worth keeping.